So let's begin with what is the usual perception when it comes to installing a real-time tracking system when it comes to returnable assets. And when I say returnable assets, I'm talking about bins, I'm talking about totes, I'm talking about drums, I'm talking about even some small containers, which companies typically use in their supply chain to move their goods around. They're also called returnable packaging or returnable shipping assets. Sometimes they're also called as reusable supply chain assets. But whatever the name is, the purpose of these assets is essentially to protect your goods while you're shipping them from one point to another. Now, obviously, when you're talking about returnable assets, they're coming back and forth in your supply chain, which means that they're moving from your vendor locations to your location and then on to your dealers and customer locations. So if you are a company where you are working with hundreds of vendors and hundreds of customers, you probably have a lot of returnable shipping assets lying around. And definitely there is an operation that is built around managing these returnable assets efficiently so that your asset realization is very high. That said, what I see from the audience today is we have a very healthy mix of audience. I see people who are systems integrators here. I see end users. I see some folks from some consumer goods companies and automotive companies, and there's also one participant from the chemical industry. Interesting mix, because I think I'll have to do some good justice here to try to cover both the implementation angle for the systems integrators on this call, as well as the benefits and the ROI for the end users. So let me see how best I can do that. The presentation is going to be about 40 to 45 minutes long, and I'm going to save the last 15 minutes for questions. I'll also see if we can provide some opportunities for some critical questions that you may have in the middle. So the format we're going to have today is 3 parts. We're going to talk about the returns. Of course, these are returnable assets, and they need to come back. But more importantly, they need to also provide you with financial return. The second part we're going to talk about is how you can take control of them, both inside and outside. Inside and outside your enterprise, as well as indoors and outdoors. And the third thing is we will talk a little bit about Roambee, the role we play, and why the industry has been adopting us very rapidly and widely when it comes to monitoring of returnable assets. Okay, so part number 1, returns on returnable assets. If only the finance guys were looking at it. How asset rich are you, right? Let's take an automotive company, for instance. An automotive company in the likes of companies like Porsche, Volkswagen, Honda, Toyota, or anybody who is a billion-dollar automotive company is using millions of returnable containers. So if you're a $50 billion automotive manufacturer, the chances are you're probably using around anywhere from 1 million to 10 million returnable containers in your supply chain, right? This includes the pool which your vendors are providing you with, but in all, you are responsible for managing this inventory effectively. If you're a pharma or a chemical company, you're using hundreds of thousands of drums or tanks. If you're moving gas, if you're moving if you're moving liquids in bulk, you're obviously using some of the bigger ones. And if you're in the consumer goods space, like I said, we have some audience from this space as well. You are managing kegs, you are managing, containers which are shipped to cola machines. You're also monitoring, or you're also managing a lot of inventory, which is simple plastic crates, which are used to transport you transport fresh produce or vegetables, and they need to keep coming back and forth so that your goods are intact while it's being transported. So, is being asset rich, is it a good thing? Let's find out. Um, are you losing assets? It's a question which is probably answered better with numbers. So let's take the example of this automotive company with, say, about 2 million containers. Losing just 3.5% of their returnable containers is a lot of money, because you are having to replace them every year, and it builds up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Are you overstocking assets? Now, this is another interesting question. So from my experience working with companies who have a large number of returnable assets to monitor, uh, the biggest problem in the supply chain is that the containers are not always available when they need to ship something. So obviously the system is very well evolved, which means that there are companies like the CHEPs of the world who are providing these returnable containers to companies on demand, which means that the company always has a container to ship, but that doesn't mean that they're running the most container lean operation, right? So typically, a company has at least about 1% to 5% additional inventory than they actually need if best practices were followed in managing them well. Now, of course, I did answer the third part, which is, do you have a container to ship all the time? Now, you might say you do most of the time, but that one shipment where you don't have a container to ship is probably going to be very costly, because if you're in the B2B space, then you have another company there which is waiting for your product, which is probably raw material as part of their manufacturing process. So, you have downtime and all of the bad stuff. But you also have costs which add up to your supply chain, which include cost of rebooking, reshipping, and of course, the detention that gets billed by your transport company because they have showed up, but unfortunately, you don't have containers to ship your products intact. And if you do otherwise, then the quality guy is not going to like it. So these are the three critical problems that any company which is having a lot of returnable assets typically faces. And if you do the math, it adds up, and the losses can skyrocket to millions, which we will see as we go down this presentation. So why are they hard to manage? Well, one of the main reasons is because they're seldom in your facility, right? These assets are going across supplier locations, they're going across your dealer locations, and almost everybody in your supply chain is focused on the product. So we always talk in the supply chain world, we always talk about how do we get our product out faster? How do we ensure that our product safety is top class? How do we ensure that the condition of the product that we ship is well maintained, and so on? But we often forget about these little things which actually take care of your product from the point of shipping to the point of delivery, and they are your returnable containers or returnable assets. And that's not very different with your vendors and suppliers as well. So because of low prioritization of returnable containers, because we think of it as packaging material, it's where the problem starts. And when you have hundreds of thousands or millions of returnable containers, the problem adds up like many drops forming an ocean. So what are the major challenges when it comes to monitoring these returnable assets? Or what are the challenges that a team of supply chain specialists face when it comes to efficiently managing these returnable assets? One off the top is, how do I route my assets? If I'm shipping something from Chicago to Los Angeles, uh, do I always bring the pallet back, or is it adding to my dead heading? Or would it be better if I move some inventory from LA to another plant of mine in Phoenix, Arizona, right? So routing of pallets is a big problem as well as an opportunity to solve when you're talking about reducing your total inventory count and lowering your asset burden, right? The second biggest problem is tackling aging. Um, Obviously, these pallets are sitting around. They're sitting around across many facilities, and you don't know how many are there. And the chances are that they can be reused, but you're probably ordering new pallets because you just do not know what is aging where. The third point is probably a result of aging. You know, you're talking about pallet loss, but pallet loss is more of a negligence problem. There is, of course, a problem of theft too, which we all see in a few cases. But most of the time, it's pallets which are left unattended, and obviously, beyond a period of time, they are either shipped to another customer or another location, which is not part of your supply chain network, and you have a problem of loss. And the last but not the least is tackling disruptions. So when I don't have inventory to ship at my factory, what is the least or the most efficient way I can get my inventory? Does it make sense for me to wait for some of my inventory to come back? Is it already on the way back, or do I have to call my friends over at my pallet pooling company to send me some inventory, and of course bill me for it, right? So these are hard problems for any supply chain team sitting at the warehouses managing these inventories day on day. ERPs, software solutions, supply chain software solutions, they all help, but all of them have a big problem. Is if somebody is not counting and entering the stock into these digital systems, you have no clue of where it is. The second problem is also that you also have not much of an idea on when your stock in transit, when I say stock, I'm referring to these returnable assets again, are going to reach your facility or reach another facility without me actually having to call the people who are transporting this stuff, right? So challenging problems all arising from lack of visibility. So can we actually turn these liabilities into assets? Well, you can, but it starts with being able to take control of them, not really just within your facilities, but actually when they are at your customers or dealers' locations. So that's what we're going to talk about in part two, is how we take control of them. But meanwhile, I would like to open the floor up for any quick questions that you all might have, or if you would like to share some of your experiences with regards to the challenges that you face when it comes to getting visibility and control on returnable assets. For the attendees, I would encourage them to click on the. I would encourage you all to click on the Q&A icon and post your questions. And if I don't get a chance to answer them along the way, I will definitely ensure that I answer them once the once the presentation is over during the last 15 minutes. Okay, so let's move on to part 2. So here we are going to talk a little bit about how we're going to take control of them. Like I said in the beginning, taking control involves taking control of them within and outside your enterprise. So we'll talk a little bit about the technologies that help you take control, and we will walk through the technology impact by taking a use case, so it's all very relatable to us, right? So we will go back to the automotive example, or you can also take this as an example with the consumer goods vertical. Let's say 2 million pallets is what we got, or returnable assets is what we got. And the cost per returnable container, some of the good quality ones cost around $500 each. And you're actually moving this across the world. You have, say, you probably have like 200 factories, and you have like 5,000 to 6,000 suppliers who are supplying raw materials to you back and forth, right? So let's use this business case and let us see how each technology that could solve this problem plays along. We will begin with RFID. I know most of you are probably familiar with RFID systems because it's been there for probably about 2 decades now. But there is a lot of challenges with RFID, which is probably why it hasn't solved the problem as yet. And we are in 2019 still talking about getting a holistic fix to this problem. So what is that? The biggest problem that I've experienced with RFID technologies is that you have to install a lot of infrastructure at every facility in order to be able to get visibility across your supply chain network. And what I mean by infrastructure is nothing but readers and antennas, right? So you got 2 options. You got a passive RFID system, and you got an active RFID system. Now, of course, with active RFID systems, they are proprietary and they're more expensive. But if you're going for a passive RFID system, which is more cost effective, you actually have to not only spend on more number of readers, but you need to ensure that they are installed in the right place. It even goes down to details such as installing the antennas to face a particular direction when the goods are moving in and out. So if, for instance, the forklift does not move through that particular gateway where you have set up antennas, and they move, if they take a roundabout route, you're probably not going to be able to sense that returnable container being checked in to your facility. So RFID has never been able to solve this problem entirely. And if you're looking at the other systems that are there, which is Bluetooth also requires some infrastructure, although the infrastructure is much lighter. And we will see what the challenges are with Bluetooth as well. But today, we have a very promising technology, which is based on low power wide area network, which can actually enable companies to solve the returnable container problem across thousands of facilities without having to really worry about installing infrastructure anywhere. So let's look at them. The first point we talked about already, which is being able to get visibility at the facilities. You can do that with RFID. You can get visibility inside the facilities if you have the right infrastructure. With Bluetooth Low Energy 2, you need to have some infrastructure installed, or you need to use the Wi-Fi access points. or you need to basically rely on somebody having their Bluetooth turned on in their mobile and manually scanning them. Not very different from a mobile RFID reader, right? But the challenges in both RFID and Bluetooth are that you need a site visit to every facility before you can get this solution up and running. So let's do the math. Why take 6,000 facilities, right? If you take 100 facilities and you need to spend about a week installing this infrastructure at each of these facilities, you're probably looking at a year-long project just to get your infrastructure set up, which means that you're not able to still track your returnable containers going across your entire supply chain network before the end of a year. And it also involves a lot of costs, which we will talk about it as we move down to the next slides. The deployment time is something we spoke about. So without having infrastructure, you're not able to get this going. Now, let's talk about the deployment type a little bit, right? So most of the time with technologies like RFID, the standard model in the market is you buy some readers, you buy some antennas, and then you pay a systems integrator to get this up and running. Obviously, it's very capex heavy, which means that you've spent a lot of money up front, and you're expecting to get your ROI after a period of probably about 3 years. But if you're not able to get it, then you are at a very high risk. And I know that many people in the audience would be recognizing this, both systems integrators as well as the end users, because there are a lot of people who I personally know in my network of supply chain professionals who have invested heavily on RFID but haven't been able to quantify the returns too well, and are still exploring options to fix the problem. Bluetooth can be done in 2 ways. It can be done using a capex model and sometimes an opex model, but still requires the installation of infrastructure at facilities, or at least having a Wi-Fi router, which you can use to actually sense the tags which are attached to the returnable containers that come through. But this is where things get very interesting with a technology like Roambee. Firstly, there is absolutely no infrastructure requirement in any of these facilities. You only need to tag your containers. The second thing is you have no site visits to any facility because you're not setting up anything out there. So you can get going from day one. The only time that you need to spend is actually tagging your returnable assets as and when they come back into your facility. And Roambee, as a company philosophy, has always opted for providing everything in the form of an OPEX model. And we will talk about that even further as we go down the presentation. So no CapEx, getting the ability to go to get up and running instantly without visiting any of your suppliers or dealer facilities. Not to mention the hours you would be spending actually convincing them to implement a system, which is probably going to take months if you're having a very large and diverse dealer or customer network. And of course, the third part is there is no issues with things like read rates, which are often a problem with RFID solutions. With a similar example like we talked about, where you have to drive in through a particular direction so that you pass the antennas which are sensing your returnable containers coming in and out. So what's the cost like, right? We talked about the complexities. Let's now kind of try to put some numbers against these complexities. So if you're looking at the hardware cost of an RFID solution, typically in North America, you're looking at something around for monitoring, say 5,000 facilities. You're probably looking at around about $40 million to actually get your readers, your antennas, and all the other networking infrastructure in terms of a capex purchase, right? Bluetooth Low Energy is definitely much less expensive because Bluetooth has actually had mass adoption thanks to its location in cell phones. And with the cell phone revolution, the production has been very fast, and BLE's obviously reached better economies of scale than RFID infrastructure, which has typically been industrial. We're looking at the software applications and support, right? So you need something to actually collect all of this reader data and then transmit it to the cloud. So you need to have some software that is installed at these facilities, unless you're going 100% cloud. But if you're going 100% cloud, then you need to ensure that your internet connectivity in these facilities are flawless, which is probably not always the case. Even if your facilities are covered, the chances are that your vendor facilities are probably not always covered, right? And similar with Bluetooth Low Energy. And then comes the tagging cost, right? So tagging cost is actually attaching these tags physically to your returnable containers as and when they come back to your facility. So you're able to get them up and running, right? And then you have, of course, sum them up and you have the total deployment cost here. There's obviously more cost that is part of these cost components, like you have the labor cost, you have the cost of consulting and ensuring that the site there's a feasibility study and all that kind of stuff, which many of the systems integrators on this call probably relate to, right? But overall, if we bucket all of them under these three categories, you are essentially looking at about a 3-year blended cost per asset of about $20 to $30 for RFID and Bluetooth, right? And if you're now comparing that with Roambee, the situation gets very interesting. The reason is because you have absolutely no hardware cost to begin with, because there's nothing to set up at the facilities. The second part is, of course, you have an applications cost, and this is not something that we are charging, frankly, to make up for providing, make up for the fact that you don't have any hardware to install. The cost of the application is really to provide you with the kind of data analytics that you need in order to get your return of investment. And we will talk about that with specific examples as we move forward, right? The third part is, of course, the tagging cost, where obviously there is a little more you would probably need to spend in terms of tagging your assets with Roambee. Roambee has what we call as a be-aware sensor, which is the size of a little RFID tag, but it lasts, the battery life lasts years because it functions on low power wide area networks like NB-IoT and Sigfox. What's also pretty cool about this hardware that we have developed is that the hardware can also communicate on cellular technology as a backup if your country or region does not have a low power wide area network provider. But back to this, back to the cost of tagging, it is a little more. It's a little more than your RFID or Bluetooth stickers, because the sensors need to be attached in the right fashion to your assets, because they're slightly heavier. And we also have some features like a light sensor at the back, which can tell you that it's been attached fine and things like that. But in the grander scheme of things, it's not much, because you have no hardware cost per facility, and your blended 3-year cost per asset, as you see, is much lower than RFID, and significantly lower than Bluetooth Low Energy. Once again, these costs are indicative based on one of the use cases that we worked with. But of course, it is bound to change with the type of assets you're monitoring, the regions where you're monitoring, and the kind of analytics and support that each implementation requires. But in all, Romebe handles all of it end to end. Of course, the fun part, savings. You're looking at probably an inventory efficiency. We talked about companies typically running at a 2 to 5% additional inventory than they actually require, which you can bring down, which means you're bringing it down by about 2%. With Bluetooth Low Energy, since your read rates and stuff are much better than a typical RFID solution, the chances are you can actually bring that down even further. But with Roambee, you have zero read rate issues, because you have no readers or antennas anywhere. It's direct to cloud, which means that almost 100% of the time, you are never going to lose sight or track of any returnable assets across any facility as well as in transit, because your cellular is not going to stop if your asset is on a truck, right? The other big savings element, of course, comes from loss reduction. You are looking at a significant amount of savings there in terms of the replacement rate of the pallets. So if your loss is lesser, your replacement rate is also lesser, and obviously we have some past experiences to show that due to the almost 100% visibility throughout this period, where when no asset goes out of sight, you obviously have better control, and the chances of you losing less. So total savings, add them up with a cost per pallet of $500 and 2 million pallets in this particular use case, and you see that the savings are significantly higher when it comes to Roambee as versus the previous two technologies that were existing in the market. Well, Bluetooth, I would say, is much more recent, but RFID has been existing for probably more than 2 decades. So what's the return on your returnable assets? Minimal with RFID, because the cost of setting up the RFID system and running it is obviously very heavy, as we saw. Much more with Bluetooth Low Energy, but it still does not rid you of the need to actually visit every facility to set it up, right? And this is where Roambee's return on investment as well as convenience comes into play. No site visits, no infrastructure, and a lot higher ROI than you could possibly expect with the other two technologies. So that's kind of the comparison between what the industry is used to when it comes to monitoring returnable containers and what Roambee does. I'm opening up the floor again very briefly for any questions before we proceed to the next section. Okay, looks like there are none, and everybody wants to get started with Roambee. No, I'm kidding. The third section that we're going to talk about is why the industry trusts this technology that we've created, right? We actually put in a lot of time and effort building this kind of a technology. To kind of give you a little more details about this whole LP-WAN technology that exists. LP-WAN is not new, right? You have a lot of companies that are actually providing tracking solutions based on Sigfox or NB-IoT networks. The problem though is that most of the solutions are very localized. They work only on one particular network, and let's say if your region has only Sigfox, then an NB-IoT based sensor is probably not going to work. So one of the things that we invested a lot of time is trying to build sensors which work for multiple technologies. So that if you have your supplier in say Canada, and you have your customer in Mexico, and you're manufacturing in the States, you probably can monitor your returnable containers going across these, which is very critical. The second aspect of the technology that we spend a lot of time with is the kind of data insights that you would get. So getting control of your assets is not complete with just getting visibility, right? You need to combine this with being able to get actionable data, but more importantly, also doing something to act on them. So what kind of actionable data do you need is also something we will talk about in this part. But we will begin with the bye-byes. We say to all the complexity. So no CapEx, we discussed that, no site visits, no scalability concerns because you don't have to install anything again. Systems integrations are minimal. No more multi-year deployments, no more migration issues. Most of the stuff is not on spreadsheets. We have some very rich data analytic dashboards, which I can show you some screenshots about as we move forward. And of course, no problem with read rates. So how can you get up and running with this, right? You can get up and running with this with just a few containers, and in a matter of days. So start small and then scale up quickly, because as and when a returnable container comes back to your facility, all you need to do is slap a hardware, the sensor hardware onto it. And then the third phase is where things get very interesting, where our team works very closely with your requirements to understand what your focus is, where you've been having problems. Is it loss? Is it utilization? Is it a problem with routing these returnable containers? Or is it just that even after investing on all of this, your team is focused on a lot of other pressing issues on a day-to-day basis, and do not have time to effectively address this, which is also where we help in a way where we have a control tower, which is partially automated, but of course relies on human rationale to implement a lot of the recommendation that our system provides. So what are these recommendations and data analytics? We categorize them into the past, present, and the future for simplicity. The past is, of course, getting to know everything so that your present and future are sorted. So what do you need to know about the past? Most of our customers are asking for supplier performance, how the suppliers are managing their returnable inventory. The second they're asking for is the dwell time, which is obviously, if you're from the supply chain space, then this is very critical to you. The third thing is the aging of assets, the routing of assets, which is the asset history, and heat maps around the inventory and the routing and the aging parameters. Now, with all of this, what can you actually infer? You can infer what are the chances of your asset aging or getting lost if it goes with a particular route or to a particular facility, right? And this is where our present data analytics come into play. We are focused on providing inventory as the most basic requirement, followed by cycle time, the movement, and the how the cycles are going. Whether the returnable asset is spending a lot of time idle, or is it actually being routed across many of your factories and suppliers in the most efficient manner. Now, having all of this on a spreadsheet is of course a cool thing to do. But what is more important is, can your system actually tell you what to do without you actually having to apply your intelligence on monitoring every single container? And this is very critical, because if you're going to start making decisions about every single container and you have 1 million containers that you're using, it is not humanly possible. And this is where our artificial intelligence and robotic process automation technologies come into play, where we predict what is the best routing for your assets. We predict whether your assets are at risk of getting lost or they're going to age beyond a point, and we recommend what to do with them. So the coordination goes across multiple facilities through automation, if we are integrated with your systems, or through traditional phone calls and SMSs to say, hey, can you route this asset to this other supplier, because this is the most optimal way of working your returnable asset operations. And this is what we do using, I'm going to skip a few slides intentionally, using the power of a platform as well as our control tower. So talk a little bit about what Roambee is, right? There is always good questions we get from our partners. We have partners across the board. We have telco companies as partners. We got systems integrators. We got consulting companies and a very diverse partnership and alliances family, right? And the questions we always get is Roambee a sensor company? Or the other question we get is Roambee an AI company? Or is Roambee an automation company? I'll say we are none of them. In fact, a lot of times we get clubbed in these categories of many other companies who are specifically focused on these. But with Roambee, we actually address 3 key pieces of the IoT puzzle. So once I tell you this, you can categorize us the way you like. But what we essentially do is we focus on being able to collect data through the use of sensors, and this is where our hardware comes into play. We can also use the sensors you have if they work well, but if you want if you want us to provide you with a foolproof method of collecting data, the chances are we would probably be doing it with our sensors as well as your sensors. So it's kind of a mix. But Roambee obviously focuses on ensuring that the hardware is rock solid, because without good data, you cannot do much about it. And data has to be in real time, of course, right? Which comes to the connectivity piece, which we spoke about earlier too, with multi-connectivity options. The second big piece about Roambee is the analytics platform. So the platform not just uses our sensor data, it uses the customer data, it uses your vendor data, it also uses external data, say like weather or traffic conditions, to say when my returnable assets are going to reach reach back on time, right? So the more amount of data points we have, the more reliable our predictions and recommendations are, just like with any machine learning or AI tool. And with these recommendations, we don't stop there, because not all the time do you have the luxury to put these recommendations to action perfectly. And this is where our B Central control tower comes in, where we rely on automation where possible, and where it's not possible, we rely on traditional human rationale, where we actually coordinate with your teams to make sure that the best course of action is implemented. So let's look at some of the dashboards that we have. I'm showing you some of the more relatively simple ones, which you can see at a glance. There's a lot going in the back end to actually get these numbers. So you have the total stock, what's not seen, inventory per facility. Here you're looking at the asset movement history of a particular asset to see whether it performed the most efficient journey. You're also looking at the movement within the facility. So within the facility, once the truck came, did it get unloaded? Did it get put at the right place where it could get picked up, or was it mixed up with some other inventory? Right? Dwell time analytics. There is obviously a missing or warning dashboard that you can always watch, and a lot more that's actually happening behind the scenes, like I said, in bringing out these numbers and predictions and the alerts, not only to you but also to our own B Central control tower, which is watching your operations 24/7. So we spoke a lot about Roambee, so I think this slide is something that we could keep short. Our focus is providing you with real-time monitoring data, which can be used to provide you with analytics, alert you, and also enable you to act in time so that you're running an efficient operation. We are present across the globe. We have 8 offices through which we cater to customers globally. We have a lot of global 5,000 companies working with us, as well as small and medium enterprises. So we know what it's like to work across with a diverse set of customers. Our reseller network, which we talked about, is very strong. I know many of our partners have taken the time also to join this webinar, and I'm very grateful for that. And overall, our industry solutions span across everything from shipment monitoring to inventory monitoring to returnable asset monitoring to field asset monitoring. Basically, monitoring your goods and everything around your goods that you use in your supply chain. So with that, we come to the end of this webinar. I hope you found this insightful. I'm going to open up the floor to some questions right now, and like we always say, there is no wrong question. Feel free to raise your hands. By that, you can click on the Q&A icon on the Zoom webinar portal that you're using. Okay, so the first question in sequence we have is, you said you said that your sensors work on multiple connectivity solutions. Does this mean that it can work across NB-IoT and Sigfox? That's a very interesting question. right? No, it's so NB-IoT and Sigfox. The best parallel I can draw is like your CDMA handsets versus your GSM handsets, right? You cannot have one handset which works on both, but we obviously do have we have multiple sensors which address each one of these networks. And of course, our network, our sensor which works on NB-IoT or CAT-M can obviously fall back on your 2G network. The drawback to this is that your battery life obviously reduces, but there is ways to work around that, and it's something that we can explain over a longer conversation when you actually talk to us about your use case. Okay, the next question we have is, you were talking about automation. So do I need to integrate my systems, and what kind of automation does your system provide? Very interesting question, because this is something that is actually a very recent development of ours. So tell you a little story about why we came up with robotic process automation is because we realized that not all systems can be integrated. So a good example would be your vendor might be using a different supply chain software compared to what you're using, right? And you need to now do 2 points of integration, which is your point of integration with your system, which is easier but not so easy with your vendor system. So this is where automation comes into play. We are using technologies like OCR, where we can actually perform some very basic supply chain actions like scheduling or routing on systems that we are not integrated with. But again, all of these automations are driven by real-time sensor data and analytics. The next question, I always like this one. What's the cost of monitoring an asset? It seems very expensive from the data that you showed on the slide. Fantastic question. The data that we used was obviously our list price, but I would say that the price is very contextual in terms of your requirement. Because we need to know what you're looking to monitor to begin with. What are the networks that are available in the region that we are going to rely on? What is the kind of service and support that you need in addition to using our subscription? But overall, if you're looking at what is a cost per monitoring an asset, I would say it's probably just a few dollars. Maybe if your volumes are very high, you're looking at a single-digit dollar number per asset per month, right? And what I would say though is definitely quiz us about the return of investment for these numbers, because this returnable asset monitoring use case that we have launched is something that can be very well justified with numbers like we saw during the presentation. All right, I have one more question. Actually, it's the same question. It revolves around the cost. So I hope I answered that. And with that, we come to the end of this webinar. To everybody who attended, thank you so much. I really respect your time that you took off this morning or your evening. We have audiences from all parts of the world who attended today. So a sincere thank you, and I'm available. So if you see my slide, you can visit our website. You can visit our YouTube channel. Just scan these barcodes, and we will also send you this presentation post the webinar. But if you'd like to write to me specifically on questions regarding, or even suggestions regarding anything that I talked about, my email address is prem@roambee.com, which is P as in Patrick, R as in Roger, E as in Edward, M as in Mexico at roambee.com. Once again, thanks for being an amazing audience, and I look forward to catching up with you during our next webinar session. Thank you.